This episode is available thanks to the generous and cheery support of listeners around the world. So thank you, patrons. This episode is available for everyone thanks to your help. Welcome to the Lesbian Romantic podcast. This is Connection Revealed, Part 41. September 24th, 2063. Fire Blue Territory, North American Province, 6:30 a.m. local time. The rebel scientist scoffed. "We don't have any of these issues." She softened her tone and added apologetically, "Sorry." Jade sank onto the chair. "So I'm on my own." "Yeah," the woman agreed. "There's not much I can do." Nodding solemnly, Jade looked down at the table. "Right. Not without the approval of President Lucas," the scientist clarified. Jade met her gaze and let out a sigh. "I doubt she'll authorize anything to help us. She made it very clear that we need to leave very soon." "Then my hands are tied," was the other woman's response. "I know," Jade sighed, trying to comprehend what would happen to the rest of the world in just a few days. There was nothing she could do to stop it. In a strange way, Jade found herself resigned to this fate. She no longer had the energy to fight. If the global power supply were to collapse and chaos ensued, that would be beyond her control. Nothing mattered to her anymore because she had lost Michelle. "You know," the scientist said hesitantly, "I don't know how to fix these issues, and as I said, I don't expect to encounter them." Her voice trailed off. Jade looked back up at her mind struggling to comprehend what the woman was saying between the lines. Her lips formed an O, as something finally tugged at the edge of her consciousness. "You don't use this technology anymore," she said, nodding as things clicked into place. "That's why you're not worried at all." "No comment," the scientist said, looking up at the ceiling. Jade leaned back in the chair and remembered how Louise had sat here with Michelle thrown at her feet. She clenched her jaw, anger clouding her thoughts again. She was jealous of what Louise could do to Michelle. Jade had been foolish to think that she had been the one to touch Michelle in a way no one else had before. How cliché of her to think that she was so special that she could change this bitter, hardened, and angry person. And had she not thought the same about the issue with the batteries? Had she not ignored all orders and common sense and left for a quest she thought she alone could bring to a good end? Jade shook her head in thought. "Aren't you going to ask more questions?" the scientist said simply, walking to the wall. Jade arched an eyebrow. "Why would I? You're not allowed to share anything, and I get that." "I thought you global people were more aggressive," the scientist said, tracing Jade's writings with her finger. "But you seem a little passive." Jade didn't know why, but she laughed. "I know. That's new for me too." "I'm here," the scientist said slowly as she turned around and faced Jade. "You must have gotten through to someone higher up." Sighing, Jade nodded. "Yeah, maybe. But not for the right reasons," Jade thought. The only reason Eleanor Lucas had talked to Jade was because of Michelle's history with Louise, she saw now. Then again, Lucas couldn't ignore the information Jade had shared, could she? "This is not just our problem, you know," Jade said slowly. "Why is that?" the rebel scientist asked, staring at the wall again. Jade got back up and joined her. "This," she said, and pointed at the bottom of the calculations. "I believe this will happen to the global power supply, everywhere. Maybe not immediately, but soon. All of our batteries are based on the same technology." The scientist stared at the numbers, taking a moment to process them. An almost silent gasp escaped her lips. That's a disaster all over, the scientist finally said. Her voice now held the same urgency Jade had felt until recently. Yeah, chaos, Jade added sadly. My boss told me to stop investigating. I honestly don't know if they want to hide this because they already have a solution, or because they don't have a solution at all. You need our help, the scientist said. Jade replied. If there's anything you can do. The scientist nodded a few times before looking up at Jade. Why aren't you forcing me to help you? Jade chuckled in surprise. She gestured around the room. Force you how exactly? The scientist smiled back hesitantly. I'm sure you have an army waiting, she said, narrowing her eyes. Sure, Jade agreed. At some point, our army will come, but it's not my army. It never has been, she sighed. I'm just a scientist trying to understand the problem. Somehow, I ended up here. At first, I thought I would find a solution here, but now I only see more problems. The smile on the scientist's face grew more genuine now. You've discovered the secret of life. What? Jade asked, confused. There's always more questions after you start looking for the answer, her companion replied. That's why you need help. September 24th, 2063, Fire Blue Territory, North American Province, 7:30 a.m. local time. Louise parked the car on the corner of the suburban street and switched off the engine. We're here. Michelle turned to face her for the first time in almost an hour. Why did you bring me here? Shrugging, Louise said. I'm not sure. I thought you might want to see this. Frowning, Michelle looked through the car's window. It's a street. Yeah, Louise agreed, smiling. At first I thought I'd take you to the collapsed bridge, but I ended up here instead. The Golden Gate Bridge? Michelle asked, leaning back in the passenger seat. I saw it. Louise pursed her lips and waited. She had calmed down considerably while they drove here. She couldn't quite explain why, but it felt like she had finally embraced this opportunity. She would never have chosen to see Michelle again. But now that Michelle was here, Louise was grateful. This was her chance to come full circle. It looked creepy to me at first, Michelle continued, running a thumb over the palm of her own hand. It made me think of how people here lost connection with the rest of the world. Smiling, Louise nodded. Yeah. When I first got here and I would connect to the satellite while looking at the bridge, I always felt like I was forcing a connection that no one wanted, myself included. You mean when you had to send in your reports? Michelle asked. Louise nodded again, then noticed Michelle was staring out of the window and so added, Yeah. A small family had stepped out of one of the houses. The two kids were bouncing around the car, visibly excited. Their enthusiasm was so clear, it made Louise smile. She wondered what the kids were so excited for. They're not looking at a screen, Michelle commented. The parents? Louise asked, focusing on the two adults. They had convinced one kid to get inside the car, but the other was still racing around in the small front yard. No, Michelle sighed. The kids. No, Louise replied. Kids are not allowed to have portable devices here. Louise felt a profound sadness that didn't even feel like her own as she thought of children in the rest of the world, always glued to screens. Why bring me here? Michelle repeated after another long moment. The two children were in the back of the car now, and the parents too had taken their seats in the vehicle. It looked very old, and Louise guessed they didn't use it very often. The rebels didn't produce many cars, and most people made do with very old models. Most families even shared a car. This is where Elle brought me, Louise said. It felt more like admitting to something rather than sharing something. She drove me here one night to show me how people live here. It had a profound impact on me. Michelle met her gaze, and for a moment, Louise thought she saw some very familiar contempt flash through those blue eyes. But then Michelle's gaze softened. Michelle chewed on her lower lip before asking, "If you hadn't fallen in love with Lucas, would you have stayed here?" Louise took in a deep breath. She had asked herself the same question many times. It was a tough question to answer. She didn't like to think of herself as someone who had changed completely for her lover. That was what she had done for Michelle. Had she not done it again for Elle? Then again, wasn't it common wisdom that a lover can only be a mirror of what is already inside of you? Michelle had brought out the seeds of hate and anger in Louise, and Elle had brought out the seeds of justice and courage. But what would Louise bring forth on her own? This was her moment to find out. Louise pointed at the different houses in the street. All these people chose to live a life that is very different. They have less comfort, less security, and less technology, but they're happier, and I want to be like them. Actually, I am like them now, she said. Michelle followed Louise's finger and stared at the street and the houses too. After a few seconds, she said, "It's hard to imagine a life like this. I never could. I thought these people were insane. But as long as I can look at this street, it does seem to make sense. After a while, it's the only thing that makes sense," Louise said quietly. "Now, the rest of the world doesn't make sense anymore." She watched her ex-lover as Michelle kept staring out of the window. Louise wondered if Michelle could ever see the world as she now did. Was she capable of that kind of transformation? She didn't know. That meant part of her believed that Michelle was capable. That was new. That was very new. Something deep inside her pushed her to speak despite not being sure what she was about to say. I can see it," Louise said hesitantly. "See what?" Michelle asked, meeting her gaze. "You," Louise smiled slowly. "I can see the other you. I can see what you would be like if you had grown up here. What you would be like if you lived on this street." Michelle's eyes immediately teared up. She averted Louise's gaze, her fingers nervously tapping her leg. This encouraged Louise. "Yeah," she said and nodded, fully convinced now. "I think you'd be very different, and yet very much the same." Sighing sadly, Michelle said, "Maybe. I would hope so." "You can still do it," Louise added, increasingly excited. "You can be that person." The pale skin of Michelle's neck shifted as she swallowed. "Do you really think so? After all I did?" "I do," Louise said and looked at the houses again. "All you need is the right conditions. Hey, I found the right conditions. That means you can too." This was part 41 of Connection Revealed. Finally, we are working up to the big finale of Connection Revealed. Only about, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50. Only about 9 episodes left after this one. And actually, several of those episodes are already available for patrons today. So if you are eager to get ahead of schedule and start listening now, keep listening now, go to patreon.com/lesbianromantic. Not only will you get super cool perks like early access to the latest episodes, exclusive stories, exclusive extra scenes, exclusive theater productions, but you will also, help keep this podcast in business. And that means I can share the stories with you but also with everyone else who is not available, who cannot support the podcast at this time. And that means the world to me, especially in the world we live in today. So thank you for taking all that into consideration. And I will see you again on this public feed in 2 weeks for part 42 of Connection Revealed.